The alarm tore through the station before I even opened my eyes. Red lights spun across the walls of my quarters, and the floor shook so hard that my boots slid off the shelf and hit the ground. I was already moving before my mind caught up with my body. 11 months on Vecthar Station had taught me one thing above all else. When the deep alarm sounds, you do not stop to think, you run. I grabbed my jacket and burst into the hallway, where crew members were sprinting in both directions, shouting numbers and coordinates I barely understood. A voice came through the overhead speakers, flat and mechanical, repeating the same words over and over. Hull breach in Sector 4. Reactor core temperature rising. All personnel report to emergency stations. My chest tightened. Sector 4 was not just any part of the station. It was the nursery wing. It was where Vela slept. Vela was 11 months old, though by her species, she was still barely more than a newborn. The Vecthari call their hatchlings small fire, and anyone who had seen Vela stretch her wings for the first time understood exactly why. She was the size of a large dog now, with copper scales that caught the light like a struck match, and eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I had been chosen to look after her while her mother recovered from birth fever, a duty that started as an assignment and had somehow become the most important part of my life. I ran harder than I had ever run before. The corridors grew hotter with every step, the air turning thick and heavy, the kind of heat that presses against your skin like a hand. Sparks fell from a broken conduit above me, and I ducked under them without slowing down. Somewhere behind a bulkhead, metal groaned like a living thing in pain. The whole station felt like it was breathing wrong, gasping instead of humming the way it always did. When I reached the nursery, the door was jammed halfway open, twisted by the shockwave from whatever had struck the outer hull. I forced my body through the gap, tearing my sleeve on the metal edge, and stumbled into a room lit only by the dying glow of emergency lights. Vela was already awake. She stood in the corner, her small wings spread wide, her head tilted toward the wall, as if she could hear something through it that no instrument on the station could detect. Vecthari hatchlings sense heat and vibration long before human sensors do, and in that moment, watching her freeze in place with her nostrils flaring, I understood that whatever was coming, it was worse than the alarms suggested. I called her name, and she turned to me at once, crossing the room in 3 quick strides and pressing her head against my chest, the way she always did when she was afraid. I did not have time to comfort her properly. I scooped her into my arms, feeling the heat radiating from her scales, and turned back toward the door just as another tremor rocked the station, throwing us both against the wall. Through the intercom, a voice I recognized as Station Commander Nora Bennett cut through the chaos. Reactor containment has failed. All non-essential personnel must evacuate to the escape pods immediately. This is not a drill. Not essential. I almost laughed, except there was no time for laughing. Vela was not on any evacuation list. Hatchlings were never supposed to be caught in a crisis like this, and there was no protocol for what I was about to do, which was carry an alien child through a collapsing station with my bare hands and nothing else. We moved into the corridor, and the heat hit us like a wall. Smoke curled along the ceiling, thick and gray, stinging my eyes until they watered. Vela pressed her face into my shoulder, her small body trembling, though I could feel her heartbeat pounding fast and strong against my arm. She was scared, but she was not panicking. Even at 11 months old, there was something steady in her, something that refused to give up. We passed a maintenance worker named Oliver Grant, who was struggling to pry open a stuck door with a length of pipe. I did not stop to help him carry it, but I shouted the fastest route to the pod bay, the one I remembered from 100 boring safety drills that suddenly did not feel boring at all. He nodded and disappeared down a side corridor, and I never learned if he made it out safely, though I hoped with everything in me that he did. The lights flickered and died completely as we reached the junction that led toward the escape pods. Darkness swallowed the hallway, broken only by the orange glow leaking from a cracked panel somewhere ahead. I slowed my pace, feeling my way along the wall with one hand. Vela clutched tight against my chest with the other. That was when she started to glow. It was faint at first, a soft heat rising from beneath her scales, the same warmth that Vecthari younglings used to find their way through dark nesting caves back on their homeworld. Her body was not just glowing for light, it was glowing because she was afraid. and fear in her species triggered instinct, the same instinct that had kept her ancestors alive through storms and darkness long before any of them had ever seen a star. I whispered to her, telling her she was doing great, telling her to keep that light steady, and something in my voice must have reached her, because the glow grew brighter and steadier, casting long shadows across the melted metal and broken pipes around us. We reached the pod bay, only to find the door sealed shut, its control panel sparking uselessly, dead from the power surge that had ripped through half the station. My stomach dropped. There was no way to force a door that size open with human strength alone, and the countdown to reactor failure was ticking down somewhere behind us, unseen but undeniable, like a second heartbeat inside the walls. I set Vela down for a moment, my hands shaking as I tried the control panel one more time, slamming my palm against it as if that alone could bring it back to life. Nothing happened. The corridor behind us groaned again, louder this time, closer, and I knew we did not have much time left. Vela stepped past me toward the door. She pressed both her front claws against the metal, and I watched in stunned silence as the copper scales along her chest began to burn brighter than I had ever seen them burn before. Brighter than any candle, brighter than any flare. Heat poured off her in waves, and the metal beneath her claws began to soften, glowing orange, then a deep, furious red. I had read reports about adult Vecthari melting through solid rock with their internal fire, but no one had ever documented a hatchling doing anything close to that. She was 11 months old. She should not have been strong enough, but she pressed harder, her small body shaking with the effort, a low growl building in her throat that sounded nothing like fear and everything like determination. The metal gave way with a groan, folding inward just enough for us to squeeze through. I did not waste a second. I pulled her back into my arms, ignoring the way the heat from her scales burned against my skin through my jacket, and pushed through the gap into the pod bay beyond. The room was empty except for one remaining pod, its hatch already open, waiting. Behind us, the corridor lit up with a flash of white light, and the shockwave that followed threw us both forward into the pod. I twisted my body at the last second, taking the impact against my own back instead of letting Vela hit the floor. Pain shot up my spine, sharp and immediate, but there was no time to think about it. I slammed my hand against the emergency seal, and the hatch closed just as another tremor rocked the station around us. The pod shuddered, alarms blaring inside the small space, red lights flashing across a control panel I barely understood. I strapped Vela into the small harness built for cargo, the closest thing to a proper seat the pod had for someone her size, and dropped into the pilot's chair beside her, my hands moving on instinct as I triggered the launch sequence. The station fell away behind us in a burst of white fire and shattered metal, the reactor finally giving out in an explosion that lit up the black of space like a second sun. I watched it through the small window, my chest tight with a grief I did not have words for, thinking of everyone still inside, hoping against hope that enough of them had made it to the other pods in time. Vela let out a soft, keening sound beside me, and I realized she was crying, in whatever way her species cried, tears of thin silver liquid running down the scales beneath her eyes. I reached over and rested my hand against the side of her head, and she leaned into it, her body finally beginning to shake now that the danger, at least for the moment, had passed. We drifted in silence for a long while, the pod spinning slowly against the backdrop of distant stars, its oxygen supply limited, its distress beacon the only thing standing between us and an empty, endless dark. I checked the readings twice, then a third time, doing the math in my head. We had enough air for 6 hours. I did not know how long a rescue would take, or if anyone had even survived to send one. I kept talking to Vela anyway, filling the silence with anything I could think of, stories about Earth, about snow, about the way it felt to walk outside on a cold morning and see your own breath in the air. She listened, her golden eyes fixed on me, and slowly her shaking eased, her breathing settling into a calmer rhythm that matched my own. Somewhere in the third hour, a light appeared on the pod's tracking screen, small and steady, growing larger with every passing minute. My heart lifted before I even let myself believe it. I opened a channel, my voice cracking as I gave our identification code, and a woman's voice answered almost immediately, calm and clear, telling me to hold steady, that a rescue ship was already on approach. The ship that found us was called the Horizon Star, a supply vessel that had been near enough to the station to catch the first distress signal before the reactor even failed completely. Its crew pulled our pod into the cargo bay with careful, practiced hands, and the moment the hatch opened, warm air and bright light poured in, along with the sound of voices asking if we were hurt, if we needed medical help, if there was anyone else out there. I told them everything I knew, every route, every name, every direction I had seen other crew members run toward. A young officer named Grace Miller wrote it all down, her face pale but focused, already relaying the information to search teams preparing to comb through the wreckage. I learned later that most of the station's crew had made it out in time, including Oliver Grant, the maintenance worker I had passed in the corridor, who had gotten his door open just seconds before the wall behind him gave way. Vela stayed close to me through all of it, refusing to let anyone else carry her, her small claws gripping the fabric of my sleeve, as if letting go might make the whole nightmare start over again. The ship's doctor, a calm man named Daniel Wren, checked her over gently, noting the way her internal fire had dimmed to almost nothing, drained from the effort of melting through that door. He said she needed rest and warmth, nothing more, and I did not leave her side while she slept, curled against my chest in a spare cargo blanket, her breathing slow and even for the first time in hours. It was 3 days later, once we had reached the nearest human colony and settled into temporary quarters, while Vecthar Station's survivors waited for news of rebuilding, that I remembered what day it was. Back home, it would have been the middle of winter, the kind of season filled with lights and gathered families, and the smell of something warm baking in an oven somewhere. Out here, among the stars, there was no winter at all, no snow, no holiday lights strung across doorways. But I had brought something with me anyway, tucked into the bottom of my travel bag since the day I first left Earth, something small I had never found the right moment to use. It was a little carved wooden ornament, shaped like a star, painted gold, a gift from my sister before I shipped out, meant to remind me of home whenever I needed it most. I had never given it away, saving it for a day that never seemed to come, but watching Vela curled beside me in our shared quarters, safe and warm after everything we had survived together, I finally understood what that day was supposed to be. I wrapped the little star in a spare cloth, since there was no paper anywhere on the colony station, and set it in front of her the next morning. "This is called a gift," I told her. "Where I come from, on a day like today, you give something to the people who matter most to you." She looked at the wrapped shape for a long moment, her head tilted the way it always tilted when she was thinking hard about something new. Then she reached out with careful claws and unwrapped it, revealing the small golden star inside. She turned it over twice, sniffing it, her eyes catching the light the way they always did when something interested her deeply. Then she did something I did not expect. She picked the star up gently in her mouth, careful not to scratch it, and carried it the short distance across the room to where I sat. She set it down in my open hand and pressed her head against my chest, letting out that same low, warm sound she made whenever she felt safe. I did not understand at first. I told her again that it was hers to keep, that she did not need to give it back. But she only pushed it toward me again, more firmly this time, her golden eyes steady and certain. It was Nora Bennett, the station commander who had survived the disaster and was overseeing the recovery efforts from the colony, who explained it to me later that same day. She had grown up among Vecthari settlements before joining the fleet, and she understood their customs better than almost anyone else on the colony. Among the Vecthari, she told me, a hatchling does not give back a gift because it does not want it. A hatchling gives back a gift to say that the person who gave it now belongs to her, that she has claimed them as family, as someone she trusts enough to share everything she owns, including the very first gift she has ever received. It was, Nora said, one of the deepest signs of trust a young Vecthari could offer, rarely given to anyone outside their own kind, and never before recorded as being given to a human. I sat there holding the small golden star, thinking about the corridor filled with smoke, about the door that should not have opened, about the fire that had poured from a creature not even a year old, because she refused to let either of us stay trapped. I thought about how she had trembled in my arms afterward, how she had cried silver tears against my shoulder, how she had chosen, in the middle of everything we had survived together, to trust me with the one thing that was entirely hers. I looked down at her, curled against my side, watching me with patient golden eyes, waiting to see what I would do next. I closed my hand gently around the little star and pressed it back into her open claws, folding her fingers around it with my own. Then it belongs to both of us, I told her. That is how gifts work where I come from too. She made that same low, happy sound again and settled deeper into my side, the little golden star held safely against her chest, glowing faintly with the last warm light of her own small fire. Outside the window, the stars stretched on forever, quiet now, the kind of quiet that only comes after real danger has finally passed. Vecthar Station was gone, reduced to drifting metal and memory, but something new had been built in its place that no explosion could ever touch. A bond between two very different beings, forged not in comfort, but in fire, in fear, and in the simple, powerful act of choosing to trust one another when it mattered most. I do not know what the years ahead will bring, whether the station will be rebuilt, whether Vela will grow into the towering, powerful creature her mother already is, whether humans and Vecthari will ever fully understand one another, the way we understood each other in that one quiet moment. But I know this, on a day meant for giving, a small dragon opened her very first gift, and instead of keeping it for herself, she gave it back to the only human she had ever called her own. And I have never let go of it since.